The Lord be with you.
And also with you.
My brothers and sisters, this is a proclamation of the Holy Gospel as we find in the tradition of St. Luke.
Glory to you, Lord.
Tax collectors and sinners were all drawing near to listen to Jesus, but the Pharisees and the scribes began to complain, saying, "This man welcomes sinners and eats with them." So to them Jesus addressed this parable. A man had 2 sons. The younger son said to the father, "Father, give me my share of the estate that should come to me." So the father divided the property between them. After a few days, the younger son collected all his belongings and set off for a distant country, where he squandered his inheritance on a life of disposition. When he had freely spent everything, a severe famine broke out in that country, and he found himself in dire need. So he hired himself out to one of the local citizens, who sent him to his farm to tend to the swine. And he longed to eat his fill of the pods on which the swine fed, but nobody gave him anything. Coming to his senses, he thought, "How many of my father's hired workers have more than enough to eat? But here I am, dying of hunger. I shall get up and go to my father, and I shall say to him, 'Father, I have sinned against heaven and against you. I no longer deserve to be called your son. Treat me as you would treat one of your hired workers.' So he got up and went back to his father. While he was still afar off, his father caught sight of him, and he was filled with compassion. He ran to his son, embraced him, kissing him. His son said to him, 'Father, I have sinned against heaven and against you. I no longer deserve to be called your son.' But his father ordered the servants, 'Quickly bring out the finest robe and put it on him. Put a ring on his finger and sandals on his feet. Take the fatted calf and slaughter it. Then let us celebrate with a feast. Because this son of mine was dead and has come back to life again. He was lost and has been found.' Then the celebration began. Now, the older son had been out in the fields, and on his way back, as he neared the house, he heard the sound of music and dancing. He called one of the servants over and asked him what that might mean. The servant said to him, 'Your brother has returned, and your father has slaughtered the fatted calf, because he has gotten him back safe and sound.' He became very angry, and when he refused to enter the house, his father came out to plead with him. He said to his father in reply, 'Look, for all these years I have served you, and not once did I disobey any order. Yet you have never given me so much as a kid goat to feast on with my friends. But when this son returns, who swallowed up your property with prostitutes, for him you slaughter the fatted calf.' He said to him, 'My son, you are here with me always. Everything I have is yours. But now we must celebrate and rejoice, because your brother was dead and has come back to life again. He was lost and has been found.'" This is the good news of our salvation.
Praise to you, Lord Jesus Christ.
Before I moved down here and living in New Jersey, I was very close to, obviously, New York City. So every once in a while we would go in to see a show or have dinner or whatever. And on the way back, going to the Lincoln Tunnel, there was a church we would pass that had a great big sign outside that said, "Sin will find you out." And I thought, well, that's a wonderful message. And God knows whatever you were doing in New York that night, you passed that thing, either you felt good for those who are good and probably guilty because of what you've done. But anyway, sin will find you out. And we hear this over and over again in our Lenten services. Sin will find you out. And we begin to think, what is sin? What is this thing called sin? And how do we understand it? Tonight we hear that very, very famous story of the prodigal son, which has been equally called the prodigal father. Because the word prodigal means spendthrift. And who was more the spendthrift? The son with the father's money, or the father with his love? But sin will find you out. Find you out what? What is the rest of that sentence? What could it mean? Sin will find you out. It seems in our church, sin has been given top rating. I remember teaching high school theology, well, religion, anyway. And one kid came to me and said, I'm not going to be a Catholic anymore, Father. I said, why not? He said, we can't have any fun. Everything we do is sinful. I said, well, it could be, but not necessarily. You have to think about what you're doing. But I began to think about that, and I began to, after so many years in the priesthood and hearing confessions, I wonder if we have given sin the top billing. And it seems that in our pursuit of getting closer to God, we find this thing called sin blocking our way. It doesn't take much research to look at the fathers of the church, the mystics and the saints that we venerate, because much of their theology was based upon sinfulness. We talk about St. Augustine. We talk about Thomas Aquinas. We talk about a variety of other mystics and writers of our church tradition that put sin at the head of the list. And I just can't understand if that should be true, if that is God's will. In doing research over the years, I came across yet another Franciscan, picture that, named John Duns Scotus. And Duns, D-U-N-S, was the town in Scotland from which he came. And so he was John of Duns in Scotland, Scotus. And he began to think along these lines, and he began to see that maybe we've turned the pyramid upon its peak rather than upon the base. And he began to write and theologize and philosophize about that maybe we need another approach to God. And that approach is that from all eternity, before the world began, it was destined that Christ would come into the world, that the incarnation would take place. Which means that sin was not the primary motivating factor in God sending his Son, but rather sin was secondary. Adam's sin, the original sin that we call it, was not the primary factor that God should take his Son from himself and allow him to become one of us so that he could live and die a horrible death to expiate the sin of Adam. If we look at a traditional crucifix, the old kind, when priests were priests and nuns were nuns, and they knew the difference, there was a skull and crossbones at the bottom. That skull and that crossbones represented Adam. That the blood of the cross, the blood of Christ coming down the cross, entered into eternity past and washed away the sins of all those who preceded us, even back to the person of Adam. But here again, sin takes the predominant role in this drama, rather than the love of God. Yes, sin was something that happened, but it was not the primary motive for Christ coming to the earth. That would have happened if Adam had sinned or not sinned. Christ still would have come. The Blessed Mother still would have been incarnate, or the Word incarnate would have taken place in the Blessed Mother, and she would have given birth to this person, Jesus. And so we begin to look at sinfulness not so much as the leader of the pack, but rather as an event that took place in our history. Is it important? Absolutely, because sinfulness is that which keeps us from a deeper appreciation of who and what God is or should be in our life. And so we have this thing called sin, but we take it so seriously that we are the worst sinners in the world, and there's no way that God, in His infinite wisdom and love, could ever love me. So great a sinner I am. Amazing grace, how sweet the sound that saved a wretch like me. Who made that wretch? Who made this sinner? Who put this sinner on the earth? It was God. He knew we were sinners even before the world were created. He knew all this in His wisdom. And yet, here we are, moping around in our sinfulness. It's like walking through the muck and the mire up to our knees, trying to move on in our life and finding ourselves held back by this thing called sin. And I would present to you this evening, my brothers and sisters, that yes, sin is part of our makeup, but it is not the primary part of our makeup. For that primary makeup of a human being, of men and women, is love. And that love comes to us from God. If we believe in the Incarnation, that was not an event that took place in the womb of the Blessed Mother. But incarnation takes place every moment that creation takes place, because God, the divine, places a piece of His divineness in everything created. And that is so it can be brought to perfection, so that at the end of time all things may be given over to Christ, who in turn will hand over to His Father everything that is, was, and will be. As I said in the beginning, we're on our 4th Sunday of Lent. And today is called Laetare Sunday. We usually wear a rose color, but I decided this is better tonight. Anyway, we celebrate Laetare. Let us rejoice. Let us lighten our load. Let us lighten our penance. Let us lighten our idea of Lent, so that we do not become overwhelmed. But I would dare say that we are given this opportunity to once again fine-tune who and what we are in relationship to the Lord. This is a beautiful season of the year. We as a church with Christians throughout the world soon will celebrate the event that turned all of creation upon its ear, that carpenter's sons can and do arise from the dead. Instead of finding those signs that tell us that sin will find us out, let us look up and see those signs all around us that says God is love. And we are the object of that love. Amen.
Amen.